Welcome back to War 3 News, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I kept on saying this intro far too fast. So the last few days have been jam-packed full of quite a lot of stuff. We got the teaser trailer for the upcoming patch, of course, and then we got a dev stream, and then the dev server was opened just yesterday. So we have a good idea of all the things that are coming and a few extra that were found in the files. Speaking of which, also, as usual, a release date was found in the files of the 2nd of March. So until that point, let's talk about all the things that we saw in the dev server, because man, was there quite a lot. Real interesting things. Starting off with the United States, the most mobile thing happening to them is the A7D is getting the AGM-65As, which are self-guided underground missiles with quite a lot of penetration. The way they function is very simple. There's another view that you can view things in, essentially like the helicopter gunner view, and you select a target, and I believe how the missile works in real life is it takes a picture of that and it just flies towards the picture. I don't know, but in game it just flies towards whatever tank you select. Now you don't actually need to do it from the AGM viewport. You can do it in third person or from the cockpit, but it's a little hard because you don't get a zoom in as nearly as well, and there's less visual indicators that you are indeed in the lock-on mode or if you've turned it off accidentally. But if you are doing it right, especially if you're pretty close to the ground, you can fire a good few of missiles in quick succession, able to take out a good 2, 3, or maybe 4 if you're skilled enough tanks. So why I say that my prediction probably is that these things are going to be just as bad as bullpups, if not a little bit worse, because not only can you do them from pretty close up, but also pretty far away. Though there is some differences, for example, because they're an early model, the A, but they're technically Bs because you can zoom in. The amount in which they can traverse immediately after being fired is not that great. So if you're too close to the selected target and not looking directly at it, there's a good chance the missile will miss. However, I'm sure a skilled player will be able to take note of these things, restrictions, and still be able to work within them while getting a good number of kills quite easily. However, now there are a few hiccups before we start saying this is the most OP thing ever. It might be, but if a vehicle smokes out, the missile will self-destruct because it does that if it cannot find the target. Though if the vehicle drives out of the smoke, then the missile will continue on its course. Although if it is nighttime, the missile won't lock at all, and it seems to also be the same situation for dusk. Generally just a low visibility. It also only had a 6-kilometer range, which is good for the most part when going against tanks, but you can also use them against aircraft, and when going against helicopters, typically those things have a bit longer range, at least the later tier ones, than your 6-kilometer AGMs. They're also not proximity fused, so you have to score a direct hit. It's better when trying to use against aircraft, use the AIM-9s, not these things. You technically have 6 air-to-air missiles, but more likely than not, you're not going to hit anything with them. Though I wonder how good they'd be when going in a head-on. They're not AR guided, so they don't need to capture the engine, so they can fire at a target flying directly at you. But these themselves are pretty easy to dodge already in an aircraft, and even all-aspect air-to-air missiles are still pretty easy to dodge with head-ons. But if they don't expect it, could be pretty fun. A few other details about the Mavericks is currently the only jet that seems to be getting them is the A7D, even though many other jets, including F4Es, could carry them. And on that, the A7D can only carry a max of 4 of them, even though historically it could take out 6 apparently. Though you can take 4 Mavericks and 2 AIM-9Js, which is a pretty destructive combo. Now there was another US jet that wasn't on the dev server, but discovered in the files, an F5C. People have been wanting a US F5 for quite some time now, so here it is in the flesh, sort of. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see it, so we don't really know its statistics, what it's gonna carry and all that stuff. And also it's been stated that US isn't gonna get an F5 this patch. However, I'm not so inclined to believe that. There is still, I feel, a possibility that we will see a US F5 in this patch. It's not the first time that things have been put into the patch at last minute. But also keep in mind that a lot of times when things are found in the files, they don't come to the game till quite some time after. So don't get your hopes up, but I wouldn't say there's a guarantee it's not going to happen. Not a guarantee it'll happen either though. So, just keep that in mind. The other US vehicle was the M3A3 Bradley that was on the server. However, it was not being presented as what the final product will be. It is stated that it will have APFSDS for its main gun, and it was also stated that it will have, as said in the dev blog, tow 2 A's and 2 B's. However, on the stream, neither of those were present, so we don't know any penetration variables or what's stock and what needs to be researched. But regardless, the vehicle looks very nice. The model's there. It has a little bit of extra armor. It's not really going to defend you from much. The battle rating was only 8.3, although I have a feeling that's placeholder because if this thing did have all the stuff that they're talking about, it'd probably be much better than an 8.3 Bradley. And that so far is everything for the United States. Now on to Germany, which is a bit controversial. We have the SK-1 105, or as it was called in-game, the Japaz Ka-2, which has the AMX-13's oscillating turret armed with a cannon that I assume is a copy of a French one because it shoots French ammunition on top of a chassis that was essentially an Austrian APC. It seems it's going to be in the main tree for Germany and not a premium at 9.3. Where in the tech tree it appears, I don't know. They didn't show that. The real question is, why is this going in the German tech tree? A bit of a spoiler, there is nothing new that they've shown so far for the French tree. They have stated that France is going to get something, but what that something is, they haven't expanded upon. Some people think that they're going to get a French version of the SK-105. Some other people think that we're going to get a Mirage G. I'm thinking it's more likely we get a French version of the SK-105. Well, a more French version, the SK-105, basically a French tank. Small side tangent, I love how a lot of people are taking up the stance that, no, it's an Austrian tank, not French, because this or that reason, but like probably the same people will be like, no, Chinese tech trees just completely copy paste of Russian stuff. Doesn't matter if the Chinese built it and made modifications, it's Russian. Like, come on, guys. So a lot of people who play France are a little annoyed that this vehicle that is mostly French technology used by Austria is in the German tree. In fact, I had thought it was a possibility that it would land in the German tree, though I had a greater idea that it would be in the French tree, because the only reasoning I could come up with that it would be in the German tree is that Austria is kind of like Germany, sort of. They're close by. Though if you think about it, it actually would fit better in the Swedish tree because the last Austrian vehicle we got was in the Swedish tree. Of course, that vehicle was just a copy of a Swedish vehicle, so it makes sense to go in the Swedish tree. This being not necessarily copy, but a heavy modification, you could say, of a French vehicle, goes in the German tree because reasons. A vehicle also in a pretty sticky situation would be the C2A1 Mexus. Being a Canadian-driven vehicle, I believe was modified by Canada. The base vehicle being a Leo puts it in the German tree because it's basically just a modification of a German vehicle. This being a modification of a French vehicle, essentially, the turret and the gun and the ammo, the French, goes in a German tree. Makes sense, right? Generally, if the vehicle exists and there isn't a nation for it, before considering putting it in any other nation, Germany should first be considered. Makes sense, right? Now here's actually some reasoning on why it could go in the German tree and be sort of proper, is actually this vehicle is being used by Argentina. And so far, Argentinian vehicles have been going in the German tree. So that would be a proper explanation, though I'm curious to see how Gaijin dances around this issue. Personally, for me, because of some steps that Gaijin has done in this patch, I feel like national sovereignty no longer really matters, and it's just 5 tech trees you can grind and just add really whatever to whatever one to try to achieve balance. Like if they put an Abrams in the Japanese tree at this point, I wouldn't care. The next one down, I feel, is a much bigger issue than where this French snake is supposed to go, is the Leopard 2 PL, which is a Polish Leo 2 upgraded by Rheinmetall, and some say that the armor levels are actually higher than the 2A5. The vehicle entered service in the year 2020. In game, it's going to apparently only shoot Heat FS as your stock, DM13 as an upgrade round, and DM23 as its highest penetrating round, and does not have commander thermals, though it does have gunner thermals. I'm not sure if it's supposed to have commander thermals, but it's a dev server, so that could be fixed when we finally see it on the dev server. But the most important detail about this tank is that it's going to be a squadron vehicle, which is going to make it so 10.0 games for the German team are going to be completely destroyed, at least their win rates will, by a number of people who really want either a Polish tank or a Leopard 2, will either immediately buy this with Golden Eagles or use their squadron points to get it in 6 months, spawn into a 10.0 match with only one 10.0 tank, die because they don't know what they're doing, and leave. And just like the BMP-2M, despite being a very modern vehicle, is probably going to be down tiered a bit after release because this happens so often. And Gaijin likes to balance based on statistics and not take into consideration why the statistics are the way they are. Probably the funniest part is that despite being a vehicle that came out last year, it's only going to have DM23 as its top round. I don't think that's accurate, Gaijin. But seriously, there are so many vehicles that they could have chosen to take place of this Leopard that is a little too obvious what Gaijin is doing here, pandering to Polish nationalists who want to see the new Polish tank in a game, without having to deal with the hassle of actually making a full Polish tech tree, or even like some sort of Polish sub-tree. I could go on about this tank, make some other points that upset me, like how it's technically a top tier premium, and especially if they do give it its correct rounds, it would definitely be 10-7, and you could purchase it with Golden Eagles if you felt like it. Or how most of the squadron vehicles have been top tier vehicles, or at least in the 2 top tiers, and they've just about given up on lower tier squadron vehicles. But I don't want to rant about a single subject for the entire video, so let's get on to the final vehicle being added to Germany, the SMS Kaiser. A very large German battleship armed with 5 turrets that both had dual 305mm guns. They didn't really show much else about it, and I doubt many of you actually care much about it. Navy's a bit of a meme. So let's get on to Russia, starting with the Su-17M2, a 10.0 fighter jet with swing wings. The general characteristics of this jet are kind of typical of other Russian jets in the same line of work. It had 2 30mm guns and could go pretty fast. The interesting part is the wings that move. You have to bind another key to it, so I hope you have a space on your keyboard, but apparently in game it didn't actually change the flight model. I'm assuming that hopefully that is just a dev bug issue, and by the time in the live server it will actually have a purpose, not just, oh look, I can move my wings. But at the very least, perhaps it'll make it so your wings snap off less. But besides that, it could carry 6 R-60s and 6 500kg bombs, which make it pretty deadly both in air and ground RB. But beyond just that, it could carry some of the Russian mouse-aimed AGMs, and in the tech tree, it was right after the Su-7 BKL. Now, that's not the only jets that Russia is getting. They're actually getting 2 other jets, the Su-9 and the Su-11, and no, not the Mach 2 interceptors. These are jets from 1946. Essentially, Russian copies of the 262s, though armed with Russian guns, of course, 223s and a 37. It seems the main difference between the 2 jets is that the Su-9 had a Russian copy of the Juno 004, while the Su-11 had afterburning engines. Also, Wikipedia states that the Su-9 had JATOs, which would be kind of cool. But it seems the Su-11 is going to be a premium, while the other one will be in the main tech tree. But new toys don't end there for Russia. First off is the BT-7M, which is a BT-7 with higher acceleration, though same top speed. Everything else is the same, and is at 2.0, while also having a new T-28 1938, which has the same low velocity gun as the T-26-4 and is at 1.3. Now on to the main course of this patch, the United Kingdom, getting a whole new line to their tech tree, the South African line. While filled with lots of interesting vehicles, I am a little bit disappointed with the way that they're carrying this out, and I would much rather have some sort of minor tech tree in which you have to play the South African vehicles to unlock the South African vehicles. And this situation is just more vehicles for the British tree. Now, I do like the idea of Britland losing its sovereignty though, but I feel like this kind of whittles away the idea of a tree representing a nation. Now we currently have 2 nations in 1 tree, and it's not like there's an individual vehicle or 2 like we had in Germany with Argentina. Now it is an entire line of various vehicles, some of which have very little to do with the United Kingdom. But enough dilly-dallying, let's start talking about this vehicle, starting with the Marmon Harrington Mark 6 2-pounder, which is a armored car at 2.3 with a 40mm 2-pounder gun. It had a top speed of 100 kilometers an hour with an engine that could produce 325 horsepower at 2,200 RPMs. Right after that is the same thing but with a 6-pounder and at 3.0. If these vehicles can actually get up to their top speed of 100 kilometers an hour, that'd be very interesting and could do a lot of damage at low tiers. In fact, they could do damage all throughout the tiers, because honestly, the 2-pounder and the 6-pounder can do a lot of damage. People have taken to call them the Cursed Puma because they have a similar resemblance being an armored car, but they look a little different. Right after that is a major jump, which I think is supposed to be filled. I think I heard that in the stream, but I can't confirm. All the way to 6.7 with the Ratel 90, which is a very large APC armed with what I believe is the same 90mm gun that's on the oval. And then right after that is the Eland 90 Mark 7, which is essentially a South African AML 90, because who needs France, at 7.0, same as the AML 90. And then we get to something that I don't think is balanced, but what do I know? It is the Ratel 20. It is a Ratel with a 20mm gun that has similar performance to the R3's 20mm gun, but no stabilizer. However, what it does have an advantage is the Marlin ATGM. It did not say how much ammunition for the ATGM that it could carry, but it had them. It did not have the upgrade Marlin 2s, but because of this, it is coming in at 7.3, which, well, I'm not so comfortable about having mouse-aimed ATGMs at 7.3, but hey, if it only has like 2 or 3 of them, I guess it'd be understandable. Another factor to take into account, because we're going to see many other vehicles, is that it had a top speed of 80 kilometers an hour with 250 horsepower at 3,000 RPMs, and only 3 crew members. Those are details you can probably take with all the Retels. Following that is the Olifant Mark 1A, a South African improvement to the Centurion. It is armed with a 105mm gun that can shoot APFS-DS, though the stock round is Heat FS. Although that stock Heat FS should still do some pretty good damage, as it's only 8.3. You won't be facing as nearly as much well-armed vehicles as you would at other high-tier vehicles who are stuck with stock Heat FS. Armor-wise, is for the most part just a Centurion, though unlike other Centurions, the gunmail of this one is not tricky. It seems to be a straight-up only 50mm with a 100mm plate with massive gaps in it. Besides that, it's just a Centurion and kind of matches with a lot of other 8.3 tanks, though this one is kind of lacking the armor side when compared to things like maybe a T-62. And then the ZT-3A2, which is a Retel that shoots ZT-3 tandem warhead ATGMs at 8.7. The vehicle is very enticing to take out, however, it is also broken beyond belief on the dev server. So its performance, can't really say much else, but it's not too hard to assume. Then there is a bit of a weird one, the Roycott MTTD at 9.3, which is a Roycott with a weird looking turret, and I believe a 105. But best of all, an autoloader. Although actually that might not be a good thing, because the ammo belt is right behind the turret, where most people would be shooting when you peek over hills. But maybe if you take very little amounts of ammunition, you could peek over the hill a bit safer. And then the final 2 tanks are the Olifant Mark II, which is a heavy improvement on the Olifant, having both commander and gunner thermals, as well as able to fire DM63. But the most obvious difference is the big weird hat on the turret, obviously there to improve the armor, though on the dev server it wasn't really doing much. Most Heat FS could go straight through it, and of course APFS-DS would as well. There was some people in my chat during the stream saying it's supposed to have a composite screen, it just wasn't modeled, which I hope is the case, because without some sort of composite armor, this thing is just a Centurion with a hat on, and it's going to be a pincushion at 9.7. And then following that is the TTD, which is kind of like a South African Leo 2, but damn boy he thick. It's also armed with a 105, I presume the same one as the Olifant Mark II, and that's probably why it's also rated at 9.7. And I'm assuming both these vehicles are going to have DM63 as their top ammunition. Unfortunately, when the dev server went live, all these questions I'm asking about the tank were not answered because it was not there. If you haven't already noticed, a number of vehicles were missing from the dev server that was shown on the dev stream. The final South African vehicle wasn't actually in the South African line because it was a SPAG, the ZA35. It's essentially a Gepard, but faster and less armor, with no Sabat rounds, and for some reason is at 8.3, I guess because it's fast, but like speed doesn't really matter when you try to shoot down airplanes. Final note about the South African tree is that the Roycat Mark 1D is only going to be moved over to that line, but generally I kind of wish they took the extra step and kind of made a Commonwealth tech tree, like a whole one, maybe, instead of just here's some South African vehicles. For whatever reason, why South Africa, not like Canada or Australia in the British tech tree. But whatever, I'm ultra doomer black belt about this game, so don't listen to me. Oh, and the Sam Roycott, turns out it was only ever really a mock-up, so unfortunately it's not going to be added to the game. At least that's what I'm hearing. They have added other vehicles that are kind of faulty information, Oswin 2, so hey, you never know what's going to happen in the future. Final notes about the British tree in general is that they have a new Boyd, the Weibly class frigate, I believe it is, at 4.3, so it's probably going to suck, and the Scout Heli, I believe the naval one, got a cockpit. Now on to Japan, who only got one thing, the Hero Sha, which I'm pretty sure the naming convention is messed up here. I think the dash is supposed to be in between He and Ro, and then Space Sha. And also this tank is different than the Giro, which is a different tank destroyer made out of a Type 95 heavy tank. This one is armed with a 120mm derp gun, with a French naval cannon that was able to fire SAP and HE. The SAP can penetrate 63mm of penetration, has around 500 meters per second velocity. In the tech tree, it was right after the Ho-Ro at 1.7, and it's a very nice addition, however, really will only live up to be a meme, and I would prefer some more substantial vehicles to the Japanese tree. For example, whereas the Ho need 2. Japan also got a new ship, the IJN Isuzu, which is an anti-air cruiser armed with 6 5-inch guns, a few torpedoes, and a lot of 25mm. While against aircraft, this thing will definitely be very effective at defending its allies. The main enemy that you're going to fight and combined naval forces are ships. And at 4.7, 6 5-inch guns is not going to cut it, especially when you count as a cruiser, so you're expected to go against other cruisers. But honestly, not even the fire rate of these guns is that great. They are just your usual Japanese Type 89 cannons, which I believe are the same ones on most of the Japanese destroyers, so they don't have any AP, only HE, which doesn't do much against a light cruiser, let alone a heavy one, or a battleship, God forbid. Vessels like this really make me wish that there was more of an air presence in naval battles. Even in enduring confrontation, you only really ever see one or so planes, never squadrons of attacking aircraft. Engine probably couldn't handle that much stuff going on, to be honest though, so maybe it's a good thing. But this really just feels like filler to stop you from getting the one early heavy cruiser that Gaijin put too low on the tech tree. China got two new things, a new top tier jet as well as a tank. So starting with the top tier jet, the MiG-28, which is a very cool looking jet, armed with two AIM-9Ps as well as 20mm cannons and could take out bullpups for tank busting. What I liked most about this jet, it was dev server, so maybe it's a placeholder flight model, but man, was it really maneuverable. Even at high speeds, you could pull a lot of G's without breaking your wings or even passing out. Though it had a few hiccups, it was 10.7 despite having only these two missiles. When in comparisons to things like maybe the F1, kind of outclass it a bit. It also did not have RWR or flares. I'm not sure if that's historical or not, but with all those detriments, I feel like 10.7 is not exactly where it should be. Now, perhaps if those things were remedied, I don't think it could carry any more missiles, but if it did have the RWR and the flares, then I could possibly see 10.7. The flares especially, this is going to be very useful. But regardless, China does need a better top tier jet. The pencils just aren't cutting it. I know people can do pretty well in them, but generally their performance is not that great. Although unfortunately, I doubt this thing is really going to hold up to that 10.7 mark that China needs right now. But generally, I'm really excited about this jet. And honestly, when they're showing off in the data server stream, it really kind of just made me want to play DCS. However, unfortunately, DCS is expensive and I'm cheap, so I'll settle with this. The other vehicle that China is getting is the PTL-02, which unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, was broken on the dev server. The thing had around 500 horsepower, which is beyond what it should have. I think normally it should have like 300 or something. Regardless, it made the thing absolutely hilarious to control. Of details that we knew were certain about it, it had stock APFSDS, but it was the bad APFSDS on the Type 69, which only has 220mm penetration, had an upgrade ground of Heat FS, was 8.0, and lightly armored. Essentially, it's kind of like a Chinese Chantauro. Although the difference here is that the APFSDS has a pretty high velocity, and as APFSDS does, good angled penetration. So regardless if the overall numbers are kind of bad compared to perhaps the APDS on the Chantauro, I feel it's still going to be plenty effective. As on the Type 69, I don't have the vehicle yet, but I hear it's still plenty effective. On to Italy, who got 4 things. The first 3 are actually just copy pastes, but from the German tree this time, they got a Stug 3G, which has smokes and no side skirts. They also got a Panzer 3N in the main tech tree, not a premium, also having no side skirts. And finally, as a premium, the Panzer 4G, which also does not have any side skirts. In my opinion, I feel like while it's nice to have these German vehicles, it's a little too late. I'm already disappointed that you put all the Allied vehicles in the Italian tree, trying to make up with it with saying, hey look, we put German ones in now. It doesn't do it for me. Really, it just makes me say, where is a Japanese M16? But the final vehicle added to Italy isn't copy-paste, it is the Etna, or however you say that, some 4.7 Italian cruiser, which looks pretty nice. But anyways, let's get on to the last nation in the game. Pretty sure I'm not missing anything. Definitely no other European countries, especially large ones. For Sweden, they got the Fokker DXXI at 2.0, which is going to be a premium, and it looks kind of interesting. I would have preferred perhaps some bizarre Swedish prototype vehicle, if there were any, mainly because I'm concerned that the name of this aircraft is going to get me demonetized. But the other one they have, I know a lot of Swedes have been looking forward to, the IKV-90-105, which is an IKV-90, you guessed it, with a 105 cannon. It did have a stabilizer, it had stock APDS, and had an upgraded to APFSDS, and had a 4.6 second reload. At 8.3, that's going to be very nice. However, unfortunately, it was also quite slow, much more slow than compared to the other IKV-90. And at such a high battle rate of 8.3, I could see that being a heavy detriment. However, I do think the auto-loading APFSDS would definitely make up for its slow speed. At least I think it's auto-loading. Now that's just about all the vehicles that were discovered in the live dev server, and data mined a few, except for that one Zero that has 3 13mm. I forgot to talk about that, but it's just a Zero with 3 13mm. I think also has 20, I don't know. But there's plenty of other details in there. For example, the F4E losing his flares for whatever reason. But there's also things hinting towards chaff being added, so perhaps they're just reworking the system. It wouldn't really make sense why you would take away the flares of one of the jets that definitely had them. Also, other new cool things, like you can purchase different types of aerobatic smoke, which is kind of cool. And it seems they're changing hull brake in a massive way, possibly replacing or adding a new mechanic called pressure, which kind of works similar to hull brake. And a good number of vehicles that had hull brake no longer have it and have this mechanic, while even some vehicles that didn't even have hull brake, like the Leo 2A4 and 5 for some reason, now have this pressure mechanic. I wonder if they'll finally let you one-shot vehicles with massive HE shells. They also buffed gun barrels, having larger cannons be thicker and thus harder to destroy, but also heavily nerfed tracks. Their idea was to make it so a single 75mm shell would destroy the track and you would have to repair. However, they've kind of made it so 50 cals, and especially the R3, can easily decimate a track. I wouldn't worry too much about that. It is the dev server, and people have made a pretty good example of how ridiculous it is. And it gets even more ridiculous when you consider that one nation loves to put 50 cals on just about every tank. And then there's some more minor details that go down to individual vehicles. The A32A got a ballistic computer, and the A4 got his gun pods working correctly. There's a bunch of other small minor changes. I don't really want to go over every single one of them, mainly because it's the first dev server, and there's a pretty good chance there's going to be a second dev server, and then final release. That's kind of when the changes actually do matter. But also, this video has become a little longer than I was anticipating, so I'm gonna have to cut it short here, but I will link down in the description all the data mines from Gszabi. So if you're interested, be sure to check those out, because they do have some interesting information in them. So anyways, as I end this video, I'd like to thank my patrons, YouTube members, and Twitch subs. Thank you very much, guys. If you have any comments, concerns, or questions, you can hit me up on my Discord or in the comments below. If you've liked the video, be sure to hit the like button. If you didn't like the video, don't hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. I make weather weekly news videos every Friday. I like to stream on Saturdays, and I make random videos throughout the week. So be sure to hit the bell icon to be notified anytime I upload anything at all. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day. In the terms of bonus news, I actually forgot to talk about this premium Russian boat. It's a Russian boat. It's got like 3 100s. It's premium. It doesn't look that Russian. Maybe they borrowed it. I don't know. I don't like boats.